So again, welcome to the July Ed Exchange webinar. We here at N2Y appreciate you taking the time to join us today for promoting inclusivity through SEL strategies. My name is Stacey Attia, and I'll be your Ed Exchange moderator. I am going to start us off today by introducing our webinar hosts, Elizabeth Michael and Vicki Howell. Elizabeth is a graduate research and teaching doctoral candidate at the University of Alabama in Special Education and Multiple Abilities Department. She's currently working towards the completion of her dissertation study focused on function-based interventions. We also have Vicki Howell, and Vicki earned her educational doctorate from Nova Southeastern University in 2017. Her research focuses broadly on special education with special interest in autism and intellectual disabilities in middle, high school, and transition age groups. Our presentation today will focus on helping you to gain a firm understanding of social emotional learning, also known as SEL, as a foundation for more inclusive teaching practices. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this on over to Elizabeth.
Hello, I'm very excited to be here and glad to be with all of you to talk about one of my very favorite topics, which is social emotional learning. And like Stacey said earlier, we just want to give you all a good overview so that you can have an understanding of what social emotional learning is, as well as just a few techniques to take back to your classrooms when we are going back to school in whatever capacity you may be going back to school in the fall. And so what social emotional learning is it is this process through which children and adults are understanding how not only to manage emotions and set goals and achieve those goals, but to actually build positive relationships through understanding how to feel and show empathy while establishing positive relationships and maintaining said relationships, right? And we know that SEL provides a positive foundation for short and long-term effects on children. And we're going to look at some of those short and long-term effects. I think Vicki's going to be able to hit on those with you all. But not only do we see social emotional learning affecting our kids at a school level, but we're going to talk about how it affects us on a community and a home level as well. And we know through research that individuals who have these social emotional learning skills don't just benefit socially, but they benefit academically, they benefit professionally, and just by developing strong social emotional skills, we are able to push our children past that academic knowledge and help them grasp the skills that they are going to need when they leave. Resource that you all have access to through this webinar is CASEL, and they are the foundation leaders in this social and emotional learning. And this graphic is their framework that we use. And we are going to focus on this graphic and this framework. And we all know that students, when they are in the classroom, they need to know how to read, they need to know how to write, solve math problems, but they also need to know how to self-manage, and they need to know how to advocate, and they need to know how to build relationships. All these things are a part of the needs that can be accomplished through social emotional learning. Around July of 2015, there was a study done in the American Journal of Public Health, and they found that after 20 years of measuring children's social emotional skills as kindergarten, that can be a predictor of wellness throughout adolescence and adulthood. So we found that not only when we hit on this self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision making, those pieces of that circle that you see surrounding SEL, when we focus on those pieces in that graphic, then we are seeing that students with strong social emotional learning strategies and skills later in life are thriving. They have better outcomes. They're able to cooperate. They're able to be helpful. Children who do not develop these social skills were more likely to lack higher education, abuse drugs, serve time in juvenile detention centers, or have been arrested. And so we are finding that when students lack these SEL strategies and these SEL skills, we are seeing negative outcomes for them later in life. And so it's really important that on a classroom level, we're able to focus on these pieces of that circle. But in addition, we focus on SEL within our schools and homes and communities. Now, I did want to hit on that what Vicki and I are talking about is going to be on the classroom level. And so we're going to focus on what SEL curriculum and instruction can look like in the classroom and what it means for the classroom setting. But we do know from research that when we expand to schools and to home communities using these strategies and promoting these strategies and these skills for students, that it creates a really positive environment for all kids. And what's going to be so important about building onto that circle is the time that we're in right now, because we're going to rely on homes and schools and communities to work collectively and to is social emotional learning.
Sounds like it's on her end. Yeah, it's muted. They can't hear. Let's see if anyone comments. It sounds like it's on her end. Sound is off. Yeah, okay, it's not just us.
And this is the one that got me this kitty. Oh, I know. Oh, I love that. Oh, he wrote me a spin class one day. I love that.
Frozen and sound problems here. Okay, it's not.
Hey everybody, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can anybody hear me?
Oh my God, I love her. I do. What's her name? I don't know, but every time I have to have a meeting with her, I'm always excited. She always looks so cute. Yeah.
I can hear you guys, you can't hear me.
Mr. Marshall, make sure go to participants down there. Go back to her video, Vanessa, and click hers.
Anybody hear me?
Yes, have you?
Yes, I like that one.
We're gonna have to pin her.
That's what I want to try.
Somebody has their sound.
But like, I always. Brooklyn said she can hear our.
Well, right now it's on a
Wait,
picture.
It's gonna be more.
Right.
And it's only 9.99.
That's her.
Okay, well, we'll have to do that one day. I love Indian food. It's so good. So Brooklyn just said we can hear 3 through 5. And I don't know if she means
what is
our
that?
class, because I really want to know if they heard what the national holiday.
Yeah, we're not
recording.
Wait.
Well, that was.
Learning. And like Stacy said earlier, we just want to give you all a good overview so that you can have an understanding of what social emotional learning is, as well as just a few techniques to take back to your classrooms when we are going back to school in whatever capacity you may be going back to school in the fall. And so what social emotional learning is it is this process through which children and adults are understanding how not only to manage emotions and set goals and achieve those goals, but to actually build positive relationships through understanding how to feel and show empathy while establishing like positive relationships and maintaining said relationships, right? And we know that SEL provides a positive foundation for short and long-term effects on children. And we're going to look at some of those short and long-term effects. I think Vicki's going to be able to hit on those with you all. But not only do we see social emotional learning affecting our kids at a school level, but we're going to talk about how it affects us on a community and a home level as well. And we know through research that individuals who have these social emotional learning skills don't just benefit socially, but they benefit academically, they benefit professionally. And just by developing strong social emotional skills, we are able to push our children past that academic knowledge and help them grasp those skills that they are going to need when they leave our schools and our classrooms. A great resource that you all have access to through this webinar is CASEL, and they are the foundation leaders in this social and emotional learning. And this graphic is their framework that we use. And we are going to focus on this graphic and this framework. And we all know that students, when they are in the classroom, they need to know how to read, they need to know how to write, solve math problems, but they also need to know how to self-manage, and they need to know how to advocate, and they need to know how to build relationships. All these things are a part of the needs that can be accomplished through social emotional learning. Around July of 2015, there was a study done in the American Journal of Public Health, and they found that after 20 years of measuring children's social emotional skills as kindergarten, that can be a predictor of wellness throughout adolescence and adulthood. So we found that not only when we hit on this self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making, those pieces of that circle that you see surrounding SEL, when we focus on those pieces in that graphic, then we are seeing that students with strong social emotional learning strategies and skills later in life are thriving. They have better outcomes. They're able to cooperate. They're able to be helpful. Children who do not develop these social skills were more likely to lack higher education, abuse drugs, serve time in juvenile detention centers, or have been arrested. And so we are finding that when students lack these SEL strategies and these SEL skills, we are seeing negative outcomes for them later in life. And so it's really important that on a classroom level, we're able to focus on these pieces of that circle. But in addition, we focus on SEL within our schools and homes and communities. Now, I did want to hit on that what Vicki and I are talking about is going to be on the classroom level. And so we're going to focus on what SEL curriculum and instruction can look like in the classroom and what it means for the classroom setting. But we do know from research that when we expand to schools and to home communities using these strategies and promoting these strategies and these skills for students, that it creates a really positive environment for all kids. And what's going to be so important about building onto that circle is the time that we're in right now, because we're going to rely on homes and schools and communities to work collectively. And so this sort of circle piece of the puzzle, so to speak, and building off each other is very important. But Vicki and I today are going to focus on the classroom level and how in your classroom you can focus on integrating these skills with your students as a way to include all kids that you have in your classroom. So CASEL has come up with 5 core competencies that make up the SEL framework, and you can imagine these as your 5 things you should check off, right? So you need self-awareness, you need self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Those are sort of our outcomes. And each of these cover different things that we need to be successful in school and work and as adults. And so what self-awareness looks like is it's that ability to recognize emotions. And so as we have students who are experiencing emotions in the classroom and coming back to school after a long period of time, either away from what they're used to or at home, we're going to need to be able to help students accurately recognize those emotions. When we look at self-management skills, this is the ability to regulate your emotions, your thoughts, your behaviors in different situations, effectively manage stress, control control impulse, and motivate yourself. Self-management is a huge part of being a student and an adult, right? When you think of those things, effectively managing stress, controlling impulse, motivating yourself. As I read those things, when I was in the classroom with K through 2 self-contained special education students, all those things were things that I wanted my students to be able to do, right? And so when we think of those skills that are needed, those are a huge part of the SEL framework and a huge part of how we can help kids benefit behaviorally and academically. So when we look at social awareness, this is your ability to take perspective and to be able to be empathetic of others and including those from a diverse background. This is also empathy for situations that people are in. And so this social awareness is going to be really important for students. It's extremely important in the classroom for them to be able to understand how others think and feel, but then to also be able to communicate effectively and work within that diversity that they're experiencing in their classrooms and in their schools. Relationship skills. This is just establishing and maintaining healthy and rewarding relationships. This is something that all of our students need, and they are honestly going to be starving for this a little bit. If they've been at home and haven't gotten to see their friends and their community members, this is going to be something that relationship skills and being able to maintain healthy relationships, which is really important for kids, is going to be vital and critical as we are moving into this new school year. And then responsible decision making. Of course, we want our students to be able to make constructive choices about the personal behavior and the social interactions that they have with others. But we want them to base those responsible decisions on ethical standards, safety concerns, social norms. We want them to understand this is a responsible decision to make and why and how they can make that decision. And so as we are moving through this framework of SEL, these are our core competencies. These are our curriculum, our foundation that we want to make sure that as we are moving with our students through these skills, we're hitting on these competencies. And we're going to talk in detail about different things that self-awareness, self-management, what this can look like in the classroom. And so what these look like in the classroom when we are talking about SEL and how we can actually use this in our classroom: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making. That can look different. I'm going to hand it off to Vicki and let her talk to you all about what these different competencies that Castle provides us with look like when you're working in a classroom.
Hi, everybody. Good to be here. Thanks for joining us. So a lot of you guys are parents and you've been home with your kids for, now, and you've probably noticed a change in your students' self-awareness, self-management skills. When you're at home, you get a lot of opportunities to work on these things, especially self-management. But we really want to focus on getting into the schools, and it doesn't require chunks of time, just strategic planning to do SEL techniques in your own classroom. So self-awareness is being able to recognize your own emotions, accurate self-perception. When external things happen in a child's life, there's a lot of confusing emotions. It's hard to decipher which emotion belongs with which event. And because of these things, it's hard to regulate your emotions in general. It's also really important to know that it's normal to experience a variety of emotions at any given time. It's normal. It's not atypical for someone to be like hypersensitive in a certain moment to a certain stimuli. They can be if they have a huge reaction to an emotion, they can have a small reaction to an emotion. It's okay. It's a spectrum. It's a variety. And being aware of what helps someone identify their emotions and being able to identify how to be successful in themselves. So, for example, it's important to encourage self-awareness in students and encourage them to find their own strengths, because this helps build self-awareness. For example, you can ask a student, what do you think you did well? And scaffold the decision that they make and scaffold their answer so that they can understand, I did this well. This is my strength. Teachers talk about strengths and relative strengths, but students need to be able to find them themselves. Being self-aware also practicing recognizing like what a child doesn't understand, recognizing that, hey, this is something I don't understand and I need help with it. Implementing essays or verbal products rather than multiple choice is a really great way to get a product from a student to determine what they know on a matter. Self-management, impulse control, management, self-discipline, motivation, all the things that parents are definitely seeing as a need when their children are at home, and we need to work on these at school too. This looks like giving a child a checklist for behavior so that they can check or mark off either physically or mentally behaviors that they are expected to exhibit. So what works well in the classroom is giving some little cards and getting a whiteboard or laminating it and being able to check off this behavior I did, this behavior I did, this behavior I did, and being able to recognize that I did these behaviors because.
Hey, Vicki, I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Hey.
Do you mind doing it? We're having a little bit of an issue with the choppiness and the audio. Do you mind turning your webcam off for just a second while you talk? And then that way we'll see if that resolves the issue. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. See if this works.
Go ahead.
It doesn't. All right. Social awareness. Perception taking, appreciating diversity, respect for others. Children leave the narcissistic developmental stage where everything in mind. My child is currently in this stage. Everything in me, they become aware of others' needs. But sometimes in this process, establish what is called the theme mind, meaning they put needs completely own. So social is both recognizing emotions and what the needs of those around, and your own needs and emotions, and make a whole holistic. So you have a whole snap social emotionship. Relationships such as education, social engagement, relationship building, work, using terms as play nice, help a child in the moment, but it helps them later. For example, you're basically telling no unless.
Vicki, I'm so sorry. We're still having some issues with your audio. Do you want to try to do it without your headset and see if maybe that might help? It's just chopping in or going in and out. We'll try it this way and see if we can try to resolve it. And if not, Elizabeth can jump in.
Yeah, I'm going something first.
Gotta love technical difficulties, right?
Guys.
That's something we're going to have to get really good at navigating in this new normal that we're experiencing. So it's good that we can practice right now, right?
Exactly.
All right. I'm right next to my. There should be no excuse now. Can you hear me?
It's still a little bit choppy. While you and I work on that, Elizabeth, do you mind taking over for just a few?
No, I do not mind at all. And so I'm going to try to sort of pick up where Vicki left off. And if I need to start over at any point, we can. So basically, she was around social awareness where I started hearing her break up. And so if I need to go back and go over some other things, I can. But I was just going to start from there, from the social awareness and what that looks like in the classroom. And so the idea of social awareness is we want students to be able to take perspective, understand empathy, appreciate diversity, and have respect for others. And one way that we can, as teachers, facilitate this is I sort of like to call it the stop and point it out method. And so it's like teaching in these moments that are naturally occurring in the environment. And when you notice a moment where a student can take perspective, you pulling that student to the side and discussing with them the situation that's going on. And in a perfect world, you know, we can pull students aside and all that stuff. But the idea of getting students explicitly started on how they can look at like hey, how would that make you feel if he did that to you, or, vice versa. And so helping students work through how they can respect others with their behaviors using these social emotional skills like perspective taking and empathy. When we talk about relationship skills in the classroom, this is a huge part of our schooling. We have to be able to communicate with others. We have to be able to engage socially with others so that as we're communicating in the classroom, we're communicating effectively, right? And so what we see with building relationship skills, I love to use different methods for grouping students so that when they're in the classroom, they're not pairing up with the same people. When we are working on building relationships, giving students talking topics is a huge thing. A lot of kids don't understand how to have a conversation back and forth. Some of our students with disabilities, this is an area of need, is how to converse with someone, how to ask questions to a friend when they might have a question that friend can answer. And so as we work through how to build relationship skills, using different strategies like cue cards that Vicki was talking about, and she hit on the different methods for, having students check off and manage themselves. Those are all things that when we are in the classroom, we can implement, and that can help push us towards these SEL competencies and working on these with our students. One of the biggest things that we're going to talk about later is how to effectively implement these strategies in the classroom using a framework that research has presented to us. And so what we can do is remember that social emotional learning overwhelmingly involves the process that we develop these skills. And so what you want to do in the classroom is teach these students the process. It's like I always think about, you don't get upset with a student when they tell you 2 + 2 is 5. You teach that student that 2 + 2 is 4. But we oftentimes, when students aren't self-aware, when they can't self-manage, when they don't have social awareness, when they struggle with relationship skills, we often assume as adults that they should have those skills. And so the best way that we can work on helping our students develop as adults is when we are in our classrooms, when we are in our virtual classrooms, when we are collaborating with parents at home, when we are collaborating with guardians that are working with these kids outside of the space that they're being educated within. We want to make sure that we have strategies that parents and teachers can implement. And so going back to this framework that SEL gives us, overwhelmingly, the biggest thing is to understand that self-awareness is knowing your strengths and your limitations, understanding as a person, this is what I can do, this is what I need to get better, and the process of getting better at something. Self-management is being able to stay in control, persevere through challenges. And like Vicki discussed, we've got visual schedules we're going to talk about later, different methods for us to help our students manage themselves when they're in their classrooms or in their learning setting, because a big part of this online education that we are all going to be experiencing, or this hybrid education, this sort of new normal, is going to be really collaborative, and we're going to be working with students in varieties of settings. They're going to be virtual, they're going to be at home. And so if we can collaborate with how these students can manage themselves through their learning, that's going to be a huge skill that during this time, if we can give that to our students, it would almost be like their greatest gift. Because at that in this moment of them working through online learning, a lot of it requires some self-management and some independence. And so as educators, if we can give something to these kids and to these parents, it's these self-management skills that are within these SEL components. I do think that we maybe have Vicki back, and so I'm going to see if she can hop in and add anything to what she was discussing before her audio cut out. Maybe.
All right, guys, we're going to give this a run and see, let me know. And then I'm running out of internet, and everybody's on the internet these days, so I'm having a lot of fun right now.
It's still cutting out. Why don't we do this? Okay. Elizabeth, do you mind continuing to present, and then Vicki, if you'd like to move the slide deck, that would be perfect, and we'll go from there.
Okay, and so like I was saying, I'm going to go back to Vicky's slide and make sure that I hit on everything that she wanted to discuss. But because we do want to make sure that y'all have strategies to take to the classroom, and we are going to discuss in detail a few strategies. We didn't want to hit you with a ton of things all at once because we want you to be able to take a few things back that you can use. I know she discussed scheduling times in the classroom. One big thing when we talk, going back to responsible decision making, this is something that we really need to hit on, is teaching students to identify the problem first. So what's the problem in this scenario? And then taking them through the process of the why or the what, asking questions. Why do you think that happened? What can you do to help solve that problem? What can I do as your educator to help you solve that problem? And then continue as you and the student are working through that responsible decision making, probe them and answer through how questions. And so you can then go through, like, how are you going to make that happen? Well, how can we make X happen? How can we make Y happen? And once you've probed through those questions with the student, you want to reflect at the end. And so reflection is going to be a big part of this SEL process and this framework, because as we are explicitly teaching students about these strategies and explicitly teaching students about self-awareness, self-management, we want to make sure that they have an opportunity to reflect on what is taking place, because as they reflect, they're able to walk through what they did, and it's more likely that they're going to be able to use that skill in the future if they've had time to reflect on it. And so, again, I want us to always go back to this circle. This CASTLE framework is an outstanding resource. I know y'all have that in your resource tab, and so do continue to use that. And just a reminder, we're focusing on this on the classroom level, but this can expand to your schools, your homes, your communities, which in this time of massive collaboration, we want to happen. And so, as I spoke about earlier, we not only have long-term effects of SEL, we have short-term impacts of SEL, and these have all been backed by numerous research studies spanning from 2008 all the way up to 2018. We have more current studies from the past that we have seen the similar outcomes and impacts. And what this looks like is students who experience social emotional learning and have social emotional skills have more positive attitudes towards themselves and others and their tasks. They're excited to work on things. They understand, like, yeah, math is a strength for me. I want to finish those math problems. These students have enhanced confidence, persistence, empathy. They have a connection to their school, their communities, their home, and they have a sense of purpose. We see more positive social behaviors and relationships, not only with their peers, but with adults. And that's an extremely important, thing that is happening right now. We need to make sure that positive social relationships and positive social behaviors are not just taking place when these students are in classrooms and in their learning environments with their peers, but we also want them to have positive relationships with their educators, the staff that's working with them, the adults that are in the environments with them. We see reduced behavior and contact problems with students who have strong SEL skills and schools that are implementing SEL on a school-wide level. We see decreased emotional distress in these students, and we see improved test scores, grades, and attendance. And so, like I indicated earlier, we know that students who have SEL skills and have really strong SEL skills are not just impacted socially, but based on this research, the test scores, the grades, those academic things that are also important are impacted as well. And so this is not just a behavior strategy just to help us survive, so to speak. This is something that is going to positively impact your kids in the short term and in the long term. And when we talk about the long-term effects of and the long-term impacts of SEL, again, this has been a wide span of research. spanning years. Studies have shown increased likelihood of high school graduation, readiness for post-secondary education, career success, positive family and work relationships, all those things that in the long run, if you talk to educators, those are things that we want for our students. We want post-secondary success, whether that's in career or education, positive family and work relationships with their peers and others. We see that students who have strong SEL skills have better mental health. This is huge. These SEL skills in this time where some students are spending time in different environments, we are having students who may get sick, may have to quarantine, they may be by themselves for a while. Mental health is a big part of what we experience in the classrooms. Teachers deal with mental health, whether that is something in our job description or not. It ends up being a part of our job description. And so to deal with integrate and be able to add something that's going to help improve mental health is critical in this time. We see a reduction in criminal behavior, and we see more engaged citizens out of our students who have a strong connection with these social emotional skills. So Castle did a survey back in 2013, and this is one of their more recent surveys that they have that focused on response from teachers. And what they found is that 93% of these teachers surveyed want a greater focus on SEL. I think that the people who are on the ground and in the schools and in the education settings and facilities with these students, they're on the ground working. They know what these students need. And overwhelmingly, the report is that students need SEL and they need this focus in schools. We focus heavily on academics. At school, we're supposed to be teaching them new things. They're supposed to be learning, but isn't a part of learning how to be a successful person later in life with skills like self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, all those things that are those core components, those core competencies of social emotional learning. I love that statistic because 93% is pretty good. That's only 7% of teachers who didn't think that we needed a greater focus on it. And so to me, this is a cry for help. I know that Stacy indicated there was huge interest in this topic of social emotional learning. And that's something that we've continued to see is that educators need strategies to use to help students build these skills. And so that's what we really hope we can give you all today is a foundation and a place to get you started so that you can dip your toe in the water to help your students with these strategies. A huge amount of funding is going towards SEL right now. This is one thing that I wanted to make sure that we discussed with you all because as teachers and as I'm currently in a university classroom setting, but I was a K-2 self-contained special education teacher, and any penny that someone would give me, I would take. And there have been about $260 million included as part of a new 2020 fiscal package that is meant to support research, teacher professional development, training, mental health professionals in schools and communities, all focusing around social emotional learning. And so I wanted to point this out, and Castle has information about the funding that is available, but I really encourage everyone that is listening and participating right now to seek out grants and outside funding that can help you get materials and things that you need to implement SEL in your classroom. If you want to make visual schedules for your kids, but you need the materials, there is money going to be out there in this new school year that focuses on developing these skills for students. And so we have already seen this huge fiscal packet be put into place. And so there is going to be money out there, and they want to present this money to teachers who are going to be implementing SEL in their classroom. And these funds are going to support not only research and studies that are going to continue to show the impact of SEL, but they want actual implementation taking place. They want teacher professional development. And so I really encourage you to do some further research and dig into the funding that is available, because it's very important that if this is something that you want to do, and as we know, teachers are already already like going out of pocket and paying for things for their education settings. And so if you want to get this going in your classroom, now is the time, because there is government funding available, because it has been presented as part of this new 2020 fiscal package. And again, more information on that funding can be found on Castle's website. So going back to that statistic of the 93% of teachers want a focus on SEL in their schools. When we've got teachers saying like, hey, we need this. Bridgeland et al. 2013, and this is going to be one of the resources that's listed later in this slide. So any of these studies that you want to go look at further, I really encourage you to do so, because they really detail the picture that the picture that's painted of what teachers want in the classroom when it comes to SEL and social and emotional learning. And so we have found, again, that developing students' ability to apply knowledge and skills to real world situations, developing students' social skills and emotional skills, those are the top two things that educators are indicating that their school and education setting places too little emphasis on that goal. And what that can sound like is that if you implement this in your classroom, you're going to have to work against your school. But typically what we see happen is when teachers start implementing SEL strategies on that classroom level, when we look at that circle on that classroom level, people start seeing the impact, those short-term impacts that we listed. Attendance is up. The grades are better, students are more empathetic, and more educators want to get in on that. And then we get it on a school-wide level, and then we can get it in the homes and communities. And right now, knowing that there's too little emphasis placed on this, you guys are already taking the first step of saying, hey, I want to learn more about this, and I want to make sure that I'm placing appropriate emphasis on this. And you might be one of the educators that's like, ooh, me, yes, we don't place enough emphasis on this in my educational setting. And so by you being sort of the groundwork, you can get this started in your school. And we want to talk to you all about how to do that, right? And so we already know that teachers think there's too little emphasis placed on this. And this survey that was done is nationally representative. And so what they did is it includes pre-kindergarten teachers all the way through 12th grade. So this is not just occurring in elementary school, middle school, pre-kindergarten. This is across the grade spans. And with the current pandemic, expectations for achievement remaining consistent or even increasing, SEL is going to be more critical than ever, because even though we're amidst a pandemic, the push is for us to go back to school and to continue educating students. And so having SEL as a way for us to guide these kids through this process, it's more critical than ever, because not only do we see an educational advantage from the U.S. perspective slipping right now, but there's a skill gap that's threatening American economics, because our students don't have these social emotional learning skills that are so impactful in our adulthood. And so I love this graphic that I'm showing right now. The blue bars are less than 30% low income students in their schools, and the orange bars are greater than 60% low income students in their schools. And so what you can see is not only students who are in more affluent areas are we seeing that teaching social and emotional skills show improvement, but we really see it in low income areas. And so schools where and this is measured by free and reduced lunch. And so schools where we have a greater than 60% of those students on free and reduced lunch, we have seen that teaching social and emotional skills improves relationships and reduces among students and reduces bullying. And it also, again, improves those academic skills. And so by taking the time to explicitly instruct our students on these SEL strategies and focusing on those competencies that Castle gives us, we have opportunity to increase our students' social awareness and their social skills, but also increase those academic skills. And so in your classroom, what can you do to make social emotional learning happen, make it effective?
Elizabeth, do you want me to jump in?
Are you back? Yes, if you're back, absolutely jump in. I'm going to let Vicki jump in.
Well, until somebody tells me otherwise, I'm going to keep talking. All right, guys?
You are good. It's working beautiful.
Okay,
sound great.
wonderful.
Yay.
So sorry, everybody. Okay, so how can we make our classrooms safe, sequenced, active, focused, and explicit? Connected and coordinated sets of activities to foster skills development, active forms of learning to help students master new skills, emphasis on developing personal and social skills, targeting special social and emotional skills. Teachers can do this by planning their classroom and encouraging these specific things for each activity. It doesn't have to be a chunk of a day. It doesn't have to be like a whole day. This can be done very minimally with just strategic planning for each thing you do. So when you are planning something out for your students, think about how you can make it active for them to learn new skills. What can you do to work on engagement? What can you do to encourage specific social skills from one student to another? And of course, this is going to be a tricky thing to do in an online setting, but it's possible and it's totally doable and it's necessary. So think about how you're going to do this engagement virtually also. There we go. Classroom rules, guys. 3 to 5. The rule of 3 to 5. Keep classroom rules between 3 and 5 rules. If you have a rule that is, if you have 10 rules on a board and nobody's going to follow them, if you have one rule on the board, you're going to leave some out. Make sure they're positively stated. Negative rules are no good for behavior. If you have something that says don't run, students are not going to understand the positive effect of that walking has in the classroom. Explicit instruction. Don't assume a student knows exactly what you mean until you say exactly what you mean. Collaborate with students to create. Give students the option to choose their own destiny in the classroom. You have the option to do reading first or math second. Give them the choice. Why not? There's no reason for that control in the classroom when you can really collaborate with students and create this really great learning environment. Review regularly. Make sure you review all of your materials and your SEL and SAFE techniques regularly to encourage them to practice it on their own. Some examples like following directions, being prepared, being safe, showing respect. Some non-examples. Proud, responsibility, smart, safety, excellence. These are words and things that we don't necessarily need to have in our classroom because we can make our classroom a safer place for students by fostering that social emotional awareness and giving them that positive examples like follow directions, please, or be prepared, be safe, show respect. Those are great examples, but going towards you should be proud of your work or show pride in your work, stuff like that is encouraging the social emotional aspect and tying it to the academics will help them further on in their education.
And to jump in about those classroom rules too, sorry, Vicki, I didn't tell you I was going to do that. But the biggest thing with these is that the examples are something active that the kid can do. They can follow directions. They can be prepared. They can be safe. They can show respect. Proud is very abstract. Responsibility is abstract. Smart, that's abstract. You can be smart, but you have to tell them, be smart, be safe. So give it an action with it. That's the biggest thing when you're stating these rules and collaboratively develop these with your students. You can have a STEM. You can say, these are the rules that I need to take place, but then collaborate with your students to develop that community and help them understand the reason why they are following these rules. Okay, that was my only thing. I wanted to jump in and make sure that we hit the point with you all that these are examples because they're active. There's something that the student can actively do in the classroom to meet those SEL competencies versus these, which are basically just descriptions. Proud, responsible, smart, safe. So I'm going to hand it back over to Vicki now.
Those are great. Elizabeth is awesome. All right, so visual schedules. This is something that every teacher should do. This is not just for special educators or early educators. Every teacher should have a visual schedule and instructions. And you may ask why. Is universal design for learning. You want to make your classroom as universally applicable to as many students at one time as possible. It makes it easier on you, and it reduces the stigma of special instruction for specific students. So it benefits all students. It can increase independence because when you have a visual schedule and someone may not be able to read as well, the visual aspect of it, they can follow along with their peers seamlessly. It can reduce anxiety. Knowing what comes next and seeing what comes next can also help someone calm in the classroom and take ownership of being in that moment, because knowing what happens next is important to them. Help complete all steps in a task. Helping them complete everything is important, because when you see a checklist and you check it off, every student takes a personal pride in being able to complete something. So always help a student reach completion. I'm going to leave it off. I'm going to give this off to, I'll follow this real quick. This is N2Wise and this is unique curriculum and N2Wise positivity. Yeah, so this is their positivity board where they're using the unique learning curriculum. This is a reading book, and within positivity, you have the option to select visual schedules, and you can put them at the top of an activity. So if you see here, when you're using unique learning systems, you can put the students specific activities above, and they can see what's happening next and what's happening before. And you can also change it in the moment, which is really neat. Positivity allows you to remove and add activities as it's happening. So say something comes up, you're able to fix the schedule almost immediately.
And we're not going to hit too much on positivity, but this is a program that would be great if you're looking to incorporate social emotional learning in the classroom that can be used in a virtual capacity. And so as we are transitioning and navigating this field of, we might have a social emotional learning setup already in our classroom. We might already be doing this in our classroom, but how do we push this virtually? How do we continue that climate virtually? Positivity is a great way to do that. So I also encourage y'all to look further into that program on NTU. And then, so some low intensity evidence-based practices that you can implement in your classroom that are low to no cost, that can be done just after a few days of you pre-planning and thinking through what you want to do, are behavior specific praise. And I'm also going to talk about function-based choice making. And so behavior specific praise, this is a practice of praising students using a 4-to-1 ratio. And what behavior specific praise looks like is you need to have 4 positive things to say for every one correction that has to be made. And so this is the idea that we're round robining praise to our students that are doing what they should in the classroom and in learning environment. Our students that are behaving with those core competencies in mind, you are praising them specifically based on the behavior. I love how you are walking calmly in the classroom. I love how you turned your writing homework into the correct bin. I think that you did an extremely nice job thinking through your writing assignment you had last night. Being specific about the positive behavior that the student presented and then providing that reinforcing praise can make a world of difference. And what I recommend doing is praising those students in your classroom that are exhibiting the behaviors that are what you want to have happen, they're exhibiting those behaviors that are meeting those competencies and meeting your classroom rules, and use that as a tool to push those students who might not be following those rules back to following the rules, right? And so we can praise our students that are behaving appropriately as a means to get those students who might not be back on track. But as soon as that student who wasn't on track before is back on track, you're praising them and giving that reinforcement. And so you might have students that are transitioning through the classroom and may have, they may have to move quietly through the classroom, and you're praising your students student A, I like how quietly you're walking to your next center. Student B, I like how quietly you're walking to your next center. Well, that student who wasn't walking so quietly, by the time you've praised 4 students, they might be walking quietly, and so you didn't even have to correct them. You can then say, student D, I love how you started walking quietly in the classroom. That's exactly how we transition. And so just being specific with the behavior and the praise, that's a big deal, is telling that student exactly what they were doing correctly in that moment can be so impactful. And that's a quick way to help students become self-aware and to manage themselves, because you're praising that action that they did on their own, and you're praising that action that they did as a way to manage their surroundings and manage their environment. Function-based choice making is a really interesting low-intensity strategy that we can use. And like Stacy mentioned, this is what my dissertation is on. And so I could talk about this long enough to do a dissertation on it. So I'm going to try to give y'all the quick and dirty of what this looks like. And so this is, if you're in special education or in general education, in education in any capacity, you have probably heard of a functional behavior assessment, and the process of determining that when students or people in general have a behavior, there's usually a reason why that behavior is happening. And so we can use that same logic in our choice making. And so when we have students who might have escape as a function of their behavior, when you hand them that math homework, all they want to do is run to the other side of the room, and they have to go to the bathroom, or they have to go blow their nose, or they have to do anything other than that math homework. You want to give them the opportunity to make a choice. And if their function is escape, you can tell them you can do your math homework in the reading nook, or you can do your math homework with Miss Elizabeth, right? And so you give them a choice that's going to push them towards what you want them to do, but still give them some autonomy and still be focused on the function of their behavior. And so students who have an FBA, or students who you have taken behavior data on and you understand whether they have an escape or a gain function to their behavior, you can match that choice making to the function of their behavior to better help your outcomes with your students. And those 2 low intensity strategies are things that can be done with very little resources, very low cost. There's plenty of information out there on functional behavior assessments. And so taking care of those and some of your students will come to you with an FBA, and you just take that function of that behavior and you match it to choice. And there's plenty of literature in research out there on those 2 low intensity strategies. But I encourage y'all to start with those low intensity behavior strategies and evidence-based practices, because you want to start with something that you can accomplish, and that you can, like our students want to check things off and accomplish things. As educators, we want to do that as well. And so starting with things that you can be successful with is really important. And I know we're getting close on time, so I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as possible. Vicky's going to talk to y'all about social stories, and then we'll keep moving so we can answer some of your questions.
All right, guys, social stories are gold. They are amazing in the classroom, and parents, guys, you should do this at home. Trust me, it'll help with the meltdowns. Social stories are stories that explain to a student and to a child what's going to happen next, what happens as a result of what happens next, and like what the outcome will be. So it is a social learning tool that supports safe and meaningful exchange of information. It helps teach routines, expectations, and behavioral standards. It reinforces positive behavior, and it provides visuals of behavior expectations. Y'all, for if you have a child who's afraid to go to the dentist, I have one who's about to go to the dentist. This is a really tough thing for kids who don't understand. This is what you do. You do this in the classroom. You create a little book, a picture book. It's a story of what will happen. We will drive to the dentist. When we get there, we will see this. And you can do a picture of the lobby, or you can do a picture of your field trip place, or the doctor. And then you say, this is what's going to happen. You are going to be okay, but this is how you're going to react. I'm going to be calm. I'm going to have my hands in my lap. I'm going to, and then if you have questions, you can always ask mom. You can ask your teacher. And And at the end, I will have clean teeth, or I will have a healthy bill from the doctor. So social stories are amazing, and it works for almost everybody. So when in doubt, do this as a parent or as a teacher.
And when I was teaching in the self-contained classroom, I had a student with autism who was going to fly on an airplane for the very first time. And we created him a book of social stories about that whole process of going through security. An airport and the process of getting on an airplane can be a very overstimulating process. And his parents reported back that without that social story booklet that we used and that prep we did before the trip with that social story made a huge impact on how that child was able to handle being on an airplane and being in that process. And this is just another example from the positivity program of a social story that you can implement and use. Again, we encourage y'all to go look at positivity, but this was just a really good example of what these social stories can look like. And like Vicki said, they can be used for all types of situations, down from, going to the dentist all the way to your field trips, and then the different things that are going to take place in this new learning environment that students are going to have to navigate. Now, of course, we have to reinforce any of the behavior that we see our students exhibiting. One, we hit on reviewing rules and expectations daily, but then also praising your students when they hit on those rules. Another great example that I think popped up in the Q&A was that when we are praising students, we want to hit on other examples besides what I gave y'all. Things like, you are walking really quietly in line, Bobby. That follows our classroom rules. And I stole that straight out of the Q&A, but it was a great example of how you're reinforcing the behavior that the student exhibited and why it's important that behavior happens, and not just it pleased you as a teacher, or not just it was a good thing to do. But the biggest point from that is when you're reviewing rules and expectations daily, you practice them as well. Just like with math, we continue to practice to get better, and you give homework and extra practice so that you can learn how to complete a math strategy. Rules and expectations are the same. We should review them daily, and we should practice them, because it's important that just like we practice academics, we practice these behavior skills and these social emotional learning skills. That positive praise, that behavior specific praise is important to reinforce. And then offering incentives is appropriate. I know there's pictures of treats up there. And so of course, like tangible goods, we know our kids thrive on a lot of times. They want candy, stickers, treats like that. But you can offer us incentives that are appropriate for your students, and praise can often be a huge incentive. Students coming back to school, if they're going to be coming back in a personal, face-to-face format, or they're going to be coming back in a virtual format, they're going to crave some attention. And so providing them that attention through behavior specific praise is a positive way for you to help build those social emotional learning strategies. I was going to see if Vicki has anything to add about reinforcement before I hand it over to Stacy for our Q&A.
Yeah, so you guys as teachers, you know that reinforcement can get pretty weird too. If you get to know your students, they like weird and specific things, and it's totally fine, but you can use those as reinforcement. Somebody may like the hair off of a Barbie doll. That is a great reinforcer for that kid. So you get to know your students, and then you can make it a very custom approach for behaviors. And trust me, just because you have a pile of candy in your classroom does not mean every student in that classroom wants it. You have to find what is the most motivating to that one student, to that one child, and then use that as a reinforcer to get the best effect out of this.